Aloha and welcome to Leadership and Role Models. I'm your host, Leo Hira. Our objective is to inspire young leadership aspirants to choose and emulate the leadership principles of distinguished leaders. That is, for these aspirants to develop their passion and take action to achieve or exceed the accomplishments of their role models. The leaders we are studying and promoting as examples of role models are legendary General Chesty of the U.S. Marine Corps and famed aviatrix Amelia Earhart. We chose Chesty because he and those he led excelled in battle. However, in this episode, we explore how he bonded with his Marines to the point where they would follow him to hell and back. Chesty was an exceptional team leader. We chose Amelia, who set a slew of records in early aviation and explored the bonds she created to inspire by her example and communications women to pursue careers of their own, including in fields considered domains for men only in her time. So let's kick off this episode with some leading questions for you to consider. As you view this video, consider whether our two role models provide good examples in empathizing, showing compassion, expressing sympathy to those for who they led. If so, what difference did it make in their success? What were the risks they took in this regard, and what was the outcome?
In battle, what is leadership? Leadership means commanding and fighting in the front lines with your Marines. When you don't, your Marines will pay a heavy price. When I led from the front, we were successful. When I couldn't, which happened in Peleliu during World War II, where injuries hampered my mobility, I couldn't move around, be in the front. My Marines took so many casualties, my battalion had to be withdrawn from the front. Pay attention to the minutest details. Details save lives and achieve success. In Korea, I made sure my men were prepared and had an extra pair of dry socks. Why? In the cold, wet socks lead to frostbite, which leads to needless casualties. Be courageous. Take risks. You can't ask your Marines to take risks if you don't share in those risks. You must keep your Marines fully informed. Don't hold back. Tell them where you're taking them, what risks they will be taking, and what is expected of them. Because when they know, they will perform at a higher level. I saw men wounded, dying, dead. I saw my own son come back crippled for life in Vietnam. I openly cried upon seeing the gravity of his wounds. I cried for all of them. Empathy and gratitude. Don't hold back. Remain true to your family. Keep the lines of communication active. And when home, welcome each morning you spend with your children through a song. My favorite was Good Morning Sunshine. You must put the care of your Marines ahead of yourself. Your Marines must come first. This sacred principle must be hammered into every junior officer in your command. When it comes to comfort, care, and safety, watch out for them. Then, your Marines will not only watch out for you, they will follow you anywhere. A simple example. When it comes to chow, your Marines eat first, you eat last. If food runs out, they know you're also hungry and going without food.
But before we begin, before we jump into the discussion, are the three terms empathy, compassion, sympathy Interchangeable, synonyms, the same, different. We note that from our research, there are notable differences between the three, but the degree and nature of the difference can vary depending on the source that you use and by the profession to which these behavioral traits are being applied. However, overall, there is emphasis on the need for leaders to be capable providers and practitioners or to avoid these behavior traits. For purposes of our discussion, here are the definitions of each we are running with. Empathy is awareness, understanding someone else's perspective, understanding what it's like to walk in their shoes, seeing through another person's eyes. Compassion is confronted with another's suffering, is being motivated and taking action to relieve that suffering. And sympathy is acknowledging and expressing a feeling of sorrow or pity for another in distress. Since in this video we are providing examples from Chesty's and Amelia's careers, we're not going to break down each piece we present by label, but rather just call them people-centeredness. So we begin. Chesty put his Marines first, himself last. How? When in the field and in battle, Chesty occupied the same field as his Marines, whether it be in eating the same chow, Marines first, he last, washing his clothing in the same body of water that his Marines were using, carrying his own backpack, which had very little in it. He didn't need much. And in battle, being in the front lines with his troops, exposing himself to the same or even greater dangers, speaking the same barracks language and terms as his Marines, comforting and supporting his wounded Marines, grieving for those Marines who lost their lives, speaking up for them and their needs, taking active actions to meet their needs, and the list goes on and on. His Marines came first and he last, even to the point that in his outspokenness of support for his Marines, Chesty's promotions may have been delayed. In support of his troops, he even went so far as to say, show him to the brig to find the real Marines, and he did, bringing them back to his unit. He walked and talked people-centeredness. He put himself into his Marines' shoes, not as a show, but rather living his life with his Marines as comrades in arms. One extraordinary benefit from Chesty's people-centeredness style is that by creating these bonds with his Marines, he collectively raised the performance and outcomes of the Marines and forces he led. They and those he led demonstrated their capacity for success, which was recognized through awards that Chesty received, always giving credit to those he led, making him the most decorated Marine in our history for valor in leadership. The risk that Chesty took and the adverse consequences resulting by creating this relationship, he is one of us, and who we will follow to hell and back, with his Marines was aptly demonstrated in the tragic legacy on an island battle at Peleliu during World War II, the frontal assault on an impenetrable enemy position on the island, where the Japanese occupied the high ground in tunnels dug into a mountain, and ridges from which they fired on and decimated his Marines' ranks. His Marines followed his orders into a hell with too many not coming back. Out of 3,251 Marines, his regiment suffered an astounding 2,000 casualties. During the battle, no Marine failed to obey Chesty's decision-making until a senior commander recognized the extremis of his regiment's resources and Puller's approach, concluding the survivors could not and would not achieve their objective. The result, what was left of Chesty's regiment was withdrawn and replaced, and a different approach employed to take the mountain in question from a determined enemy. We'll return to Peleliu later, but first, let's consider and summarize Chesty's contributions to empathy, compassion, and sympathy at this point. We already described how Chesty literally saw through the eyes and walked in the shoes of his Marines by actually being there, living the same life with his Marines, with the additional responsibility of providing leadership and making the decisions necessary to achieve military victory, which he did. Chesty's people traits, exemplified by even single and consistent acts like eating last in the field, being fanatical about the care being provided to his wounded, writing letters to his wounded, were concrete examples of people-centeredness in action. Now, turning to Amelia.
I promoted women in flight with a passion. My flying career was pioneering. It took place in a time when women were expected to stay home, unsuitable for the physical and mental demands and rigors of flying. My flying career spanned the World War I period through the Great Depression and political uncertainties that led to World War II. When I was 28, I was selected to be the first woman to fly as a passenger across the entire Atlantic. I organized the 99s, a women's flight advocacy group that's still active today. I wrote for Cosmopolitan magazine. I did radio talks. I lectured across country, and I wrote my own books. My vision was to use flying as a platform to inspire women and convince everyone that women are equal. A pilot is a pilot.
I wanted to share, give hope, inspire, bring good news to the public, and especially in turbulent times, to share technology expansion and what I knew that flight would become a common form of transportation for everyone.
Amelia, by most accounts, grew up as a tomboy, which, by climbing trees, jumping fences, wearing boyish clothes, in her times, was a set of behaviors frowned upon by the older generations, especially those considered to belong to the genteel part of society, which in her youth included Amelia. She grew up driven by a passion for independence, a determination to demonstrate that as a woman she could excel in areas typically considered domains of men, including sports, promoting women pursuing careers. Now, how is that people-centeredness, especially in the cause of promoting women? Well, women adulated Amelia and looked to her for inspiration. So, is it likely that an adoring public could be bamboozled for a decade and until today by Amelia feigning interest in promotion of women's causes, pretending to stand in their shoes, faking that she was taking action on behalf of women, and really just having no sympathy for women and their rights? Were all of these actions just so she could advance her career to fly farther and further? Well, if that is the way she really behaved, Amelia was a great artist in feigning these behavioral traits in public. However, that's not who Amelia was if one looks at her early years before 1928, when she gained international fame for being the first woman flown across the Atlantic. Consider the following. Her immediate family had its problems. Father was an alcoholic, on and off. Mother traumatized by their divorce. A younger sister who looked to Amelia for guidance and support. Amelia provided that support and exhibited all three behaviors in her private life with her family. She gave up opportunities to support her mother and provided financial support for mom and for her own sister, stayed in contact and interacted with her father, and even moved to areas where they resided as needed. While going to Ogun's College in Pennsylvania, she visited Toronto during World War I, and upon witnessing the horrible wounds of returning troops, she left Ogun's and studied to and became a nurse. Later, she discovered social work and worked with immigrant women and girls in a capacity as a provider of social services. By accounts, she excelled in this capacity and even planned to return to social work after her historic flight across the Atlantic. Then there is her aviation career itself. These include a seeming crossover from her experience with her father's alcoholism with three major figures in her aviation career. The first was an lead-in to the historic flight that gained her fame, the flight across the Atlantic. Amelia was named captain of the flight, even though she took no part in piloting the flight with decision-making power. One of the two pilots was an alcoholic and drank heavily while they were waiting to take off. He drank himself to unconsciousness. The other pilot refused to fly, but Amelia persuaded him to persevere. They carried the drunk and unconscious pilot to the plane, and they succeeded in takeoff and in making history. Later during her career, and for her last flight, the same problem bedeviled her technical advisor, a renowned elite flyer who flew stunts, a known heavy drinker. She stuck by him. And lastly, her navigator on her fatal flight around the world may have succumbed to his alcoholic addiction on that flight, and she still went on, leading to tragic consequences. They got lost, ran out of gas, and disappeared into the ocean. Amelia knew and understood their plight, but refused to act in a way to out them and destroy their reputations and careers. She rather worked with them, accepting the risks, which in the case of her navigator for her round-the-world flight, she paid the ultimate price. So once again, we have examples from her life that she possessed an ability to see plight in people, be they newly arrived immigrants or alcoholic comrades in aviation, and doggedly, even if mistakenly, take action to preserve their reputation and see them succeed. As for the adoring public, they believed in Amelia, and she backed up their beliefs that women could excel in aviation, and by example, inspiring women in aviation and other professions, requiring the types of skills, physical and mental, to achieve success supposedly attributable only to men. Her accomplishment brought cheer during the Great Depression and in the years preceding World War II. But, as did for Chesty, empathy, compassion, sympathy came with its risks and ultimately, in Amelia's case, fatal results. Of course, there were other factors attributable to Amelia that can be pointed for the failure of both attempts to circle globe. A journey of 29,000 miles, which, by the way, was accomplished by a woman in 1967. Another incident regarding her interaction with people on the private side of Amelia does a lot to exemplify where she stood in terms of people-centeredness. Before she came to fame, she was deeply involved in making decisions on how to invest the last of the family's inheritance her mother had received. They invested in a gypsum mine, and on the day they went to the mine to begin operations, a rainstorm flooded the mine, and in trying to escape from the area, one of their partners was killed. Amelia decided, and her mother concurred, that the proceeds of the sale of the gypsum already removed from the mine should go to the deceased partner's family, and the assets go to her fiancé, who she did not marry. Finally, there is the issue of dealing with technology by Amelia. She garnered and embraced the knowledge necessary about her airplanes, starting with once taking a job in a car repair shop, working on engines, and thereafter being there in the building and modification of her planes. But once again, she placed her faith in people, be it on her cross-Atlantic flight, a passenger, in her own flying skills in setting records, and tragically on her fatal flight, where a decision was made to not take communication equipment, which would have improved her chances to communicate with a waiting ship stationed at her refueling stop on an island between New Guinea and Hawaii. With the equipment on board, she never heard the signals being sent from that ship, ran out of gas, and disappeared. Chesty's performance at Peleliu is often highlighted at his failure of understanding technology in the context of air and naval support and in the use of artillery. It is asserted that he was addicted to personal combat, kind of a mano-a-mano approach, and believed his Marines could do anything as long as they kept up the pressure. His frontal assaults on Peleliu were likened to the banzai charges by Japanese in Guadalcanal, where his own units killed hundreds of Japanese. What an ironic turn of events at Peleliu. These are cautionary lessons to be learned. Today's leaders have to, much more than in our role models' time, knowledgeable in balancing the interaction between technology and those that they lead. In summary, Chesty and Amelia provide exceptional examples of what can be accomplished when people recognizing people and seeing through their eyes, taking action to meet their needs when in distress, being people-centered, whether it's for an alcoholic pilot, a Marine in the brig, or in both with their families. The caution being that in creating those bonds, critical decision-making rests on the shoulders of the leader, and times do arise wherein other issues than just beliefs in one's own people, and they on the leader, can bring about bad, even tragic results. Neither Chesty nor Amelia could have accomplished what they did without people skills and the attributes that are empathy, compassion, and sympathy. They have to be considered, practiced, and mastered by today's leaders. After all, the people that they lead are people. Mahalo for watching, and until next time, aloha.